Reverend Williams is the host of a weekly religious program on this station entitled Vibrations for a New People. Because of their friendship, Miss Davis asked to appear on Vibrations, and in so doing granted the first American broadcast interview since her arrest in connection with the August 7th, 1970 shootout at the Marin County Courthouse. Her pre-trial procedures have taken the longest time of any California trial in history. Throughout those 13 months, there have developed charges that she's a political prisoner. Because of this, she's drawn international attention and has become one of the central figures in a very large and militant movement reflecting the concerns of oppressed minorities. We're presenting this program at this special time because people of all persuasions from all parts of the country and the world have come to regard Miss Davis in strong terms. Most have formed these opinions in favor or against her without ever being exposed to her writing, her teaching, or other personal statements. If this program results in nothing more than better informed but unchanged opinion, it will have been worth our attention. And one final note. While this conversation was filmed in the jail where she awaits her trial, the discussion in no way touches upon matters directly related to Miss Davis's trial. It was filmed under specific guidelines and viewed by the attorneys involved in the trial. This represents further programming in connection with the various aspects of Angela Davis's involvement in the controversial militant minority movement.
Well, Angela, we're going to rap a little while about a number of things, but I guess one of the most important things that we can start off talking about is the fact that you have been called a revolutionary, a militant. Much of the media has pictured you this way. It's talked about all over the world. What do you see as the meaning of the term revolutionary?
Well, there's no single, simple meaning of the term revolutionary. A revolutionary is a man or a woman who is a lot of things, but basically, the revolutionary wants to change the nature of society in a way to promote a world where the needs and interests of the people are responded to. A revolutionary realizes, however, that in order to create a world where human beings can live and love and be healthy and create, you have to completely revolutionize the entire fabric of society. You have to overturn the economic structure where you have a few individuals who are in possession of the vast majority of the wealth in this country that's been produced by the majority of the people, and you have to destroy this political apparatus which, under the guise of revolutionary government, perpetrates the most incredible misery on the masses of people.
One of the interesting things about the term revolutionary is the fact that people, so many people, see it in the context of violence, that revolutionary means violence. Violence every day, every minute, at any given time, no matter what the circumstances. How do you view this in the context of violence?
Well, of course, that's part and parcel of the same attempt to separate and isolate revolutionaries from the people. Of course, revolution does not mean violence in the sense that that's its defining characteristic.
Yet there are those who see it that way.
Well, that's done in a very conscious manner to mislead people and to lead people to, for instance, equate a progressive socialist revolution with fascism. During the time that I was out in the streets and speaking throughout California, I found it incredible how many people defined socialism or communism as if it were the Third Reich.
Yeah.
Certainly, of course, so in the history of revolutions, and not only socialist revolutions, but bourgeois democratic revolutions also. The American Revolution, for instance, you have had the occurrence of violence as a means of seizing power from the oppressor. But why?
Yeah.
This is because the oppressors have failed to acknowledge the fact that the people were right and that the people had the right to control their lives and to control their destinies. And they are the ones who always initiate the violence. If people are serious about moving ahead to create a better society, then of course they should not allow themselves to be deterred simply because a few people at the top, who are in possession usually of monopoly on violence, decide that they're going to unleash all of their forces of oppression to stop them.
Angela, the interesting thing I think that's emerged is your struggle with the Soledad brothers and your struggle with the Soledad trial. How did you get involved in this whole area of demonstrating and of speaking and of organizing for the Soledad brothers?
I was invited in the spring of 1970 to attend a meeting that had been organized by some of the attorneys involved in the Soledad brothers case. The meeting was held in Los Angeles. I attended that meeting, and there I assumed the responsibility for doing a certain amount of organizing, primarily on the campuses, because I was at UCLA at the time, to inform the people as to what was happening to George Jackson, John Clouchet, and Fleta Drumgo.
Mm-hmm. How this affected you a great deal, because you participated very strongly in it. You became extremely close to one of the participants of the Soledad brothers, namely George Jackson. What was George Jackson really like?
Well, I became very close to the members of George's family in the process of trying to organize around the Soledad Brothers Defense Committee, all of George's family, Jonathan, Mrs. Jackson, Mr. Jackson, and George and Jonathan's sisters, who were all extremely beautiful and extremely strong people. They were all involved in the political activity around the case. I did come to have a certain amount of contact, primarily indirect, of course, with George. The only time I saw him was at a hearing I attended in Salinas. But it was almost impossible not to see the strength and the love that George Jackson had within himself, a love that expressed itself in a million different ways, a love for his people, a love for oppressed people, a love for all the people with whom he had any contact. All he used to call them all the innocents, all the people who had not already actively aligned themselves with the forces of oppression.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I remember reading one of his letters. In fact, I read his book, but one of the letters where he said that he had no self, he had no image, he had no ears, no eyes. He went on to talk about this, but some of the most interesting letters were the ones that you and George exchanged. They were very moving letters. You undoubtedly had some kind of understanding as people who were struggling together. Well, were there some common strings there that in the struggle that you felt very strongly about, you and George?
Well, George was a revolutionary. George considered himself a communist revolutionary, and he felt that his revolutionary beliefs and the struggles that he had to wage were far more important than his own life. That's why he spent 11 years in prison for a crime that was,
what was
so
it, $70?
insignificant. $70. And if he had had at that time a good lawyer, and if racism had not been what it was, he never would have been in prison in the first place. And that's what was so ridiculous about it. But it was not, I don't think that I would say that George was lacking in a personal image. That was one of the things that was so beautiful and so incredible about him, that he was able to perfectly merge his political life with his personal life. There was no conflict between the two, and the one was very much enhanced by the other. Within his political struggles, there was a very profound personal love and identity and solidarity with all his sisters and brothers, with all his comrades. Then every personal relationship he had was determined by and infused with the struggle for liberation.
The interesting thing about it is the fact that George Jackson was killed August 21st. And at that particular time, we saw some new directions occur in the prison system. For instance, there was the Attica, there was San Quentin. How do you perceive the penal institutions at this particular time in regards to what they call rehabilitation and other directions that they may be taking now that the death of George has occurred and Attica has broken loose and possibly other prisons as well?
Well, things have been festering under the surface in the prison system for a long time. In fact, when I became involved with the Soledad Brothers Defense Committee in Los Angeles, at first we simply took it upon ourselves to defend George Jackson, John Clouchet, and Fleeta Drumgo. But we later realized that the question was much broader than that. It wasn't simply a matter of three individuals who were being subject to the repressive forces of the penal system. It was the system itself that had to be attacked. It was the system itself that had to be abolished, so that we eventually broadened the field of our to include an assault on the prison system as a whole.
Well, what you're strongly implying, I gather, then, is that the character of justice is not really changing that much, even though recently we've seen Bobby Seale, Erica Huggins, Huey Newton just recently, who have been freed. Is the character of justice really changing that much?
Well, what is justice? I mean, what does justice mean? Does justice simply mean that a person who has been charged with a crime is going to be acquitted? I mean, that's what happened, of course, to Erica and Bobby and Huey and the New York 21 and the LA Panthers, who were just recently on trial. They were acquitted, or the charges dismissed against them, but that appears to me to be a purely formalistic view of what justice is. Empty. It has no content. If you can pick out someone, single a black person, a black revolutionary out, charge him with an unbailable offense, put him or her in jail for 2 years, 2.5 years is in the case of the New York 21, I think. And then afterwards, get up with the case that you have that doesn't have any water at all, and have the jury acquit them. Is that what justice is all? They've lost years of their life. See, what has happened in those cases is that the black revolutionary leaders have been effectively silenced. They have been separated from their people, isolated from the community for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years.
You see, this is a contrived, calculated effort on the part of the powers to be, the ruling class, to make sure that they are separated from from their people?
Well, see, there are a lot of ways in which repression can express itself. It does not necessarily mean being shot down. It does not even necessarily mean being sentenced to prison. It can mean being detained for so long that one cannot be effective in the community. It can mean being forced into exile, as Eldridge Cleaver was forced into exile, and we see what has happened to Eldridge and what his exile has meant for his ability to be effective in the black liberation struggle here. There are a myriad of ways in which you can repress a developing liberation movement.
I guess the thing that concerns me very much has to do with those unnamed blacks, Chicanos, Asians, Indians, poor people who go to the courts every day, who are sentenced. And in fact, we don't read about them. We don't know about them. They are imprisoned. It's like, as someone suggested some time ago, that so many people in prison did not really have the kind of adequate defense, legal counsel that they needed. Time after time, we have been told that people who are going before the courts have been told to plead guilty, and they'd only get 3 months. And of course, this meant an extensive amount of time in prison. But I've heard you talk about the nameless prisoners who are who have no recourse because they did not have adequate representation.
One of the things that is so incredible, and I don't imagine that most people are aware of this fact. I myself wasn't aware of it until recently. Of all the people who are arrested in this country and charged with crimes, only 1% are ever tried by a jury. Only 1% are ever tried by a jury, which means that the vast majority of people in this country who are brought before a court either end up pleading guilty on the advice of a public defender who doesn't have the time, who does not identify with his client, who has the interests of an overcrowded court system uppermost in his mind. He counsels them to plead guilty, and they, as you said, he tries to make a deal. Sometimes that doesn't work.
I wonder. Do you really see this as a means of committing engaging in a contrived effort on the part of those who make the decisions of eliminating black people? Is this a form of suppression also? To make sure, in other words, that black people are railroaded into prisons, into jail?
In the whole history of the United States, the impact of racism has been to attempt to contain black people, has been to attempt to stifle the desires towards liberation. One of the ways in which this is accomplished is by trying to convince black people that they're completely powerless before this huge apparatus, and that the police can just come into the community and pick someone out, kill them, as they have done on many, many occasions in the past, charge them with something they didn't do, railroad them to prison, send them to the gas chamber. This is just one of the many ways that the system, and it's not a contrived effort in the sense that it's done consciously by a few men up at the top. It's built into the system. It's built into it's built into the nature of this society. And getting back to the question of what a revolutionary is, black revolutionary realizes that we cannot begin to combat racism. We cannot begin to effectively destroy racism until we've destroyed the whole system.
Now, I guess the amazing thing is that we've noticed that in the state of California, they have what is called the indeterminate sentencing of prisoners. The adult authority has the power to determine when a person is paroled, what time that person is paroled, if in fact that person is paroled. Mm-hmm. I've talked to a number of prisoners who've said this is another means set up by a racist system to control the affairs and the destiny of black people. Do you see this as a certain direction of providing controls on the lives of those prisoners who are in prison?
Well, see, it's interesting that when the indeterminate sentence law was first enacted, it was presented as one of the most progressive reforms in the prison system. That's one of the reasons, among many others, that California today is ironically considered to be the most progressive section of the American penal system. Originally, or at least it was stated that originally the purpose of the indeterminate sentence law was to allow for the greatest flexibility in rehabilitation. That meant that if a prisoner was, say, charged or convicted of an offense that carried, say, a straight 10-year sentence, he would not get 10 years, but he might get, say, 2 to 15, because it's possible that in 2 years he might have, quote, rehabilitated himself. And it would have been overly inhuman to force him to spend 8 more years in prison. But how is this function in reality? In reality, the indeterminate sentence law has done precisely what you say it has done. It has provided an effective, very brutal means of control over the lives of sisters and brothers who are in prison. What does this mean? It means that there's an 8-man board.
Composed of,
and I was just looking at this paper that was done on prisons not too long ago. It gives a rundown on who's on the adult authority. And it says that the 6 whites on the panel, and check this out, include a former assistant commander of the Los Angeles Police Department Detective Bureau, a former FBI agent in charge of the San Francisco office, a former deputy United States attorney for the Southern District of California, a former district attorney for Fresno, a former police chief of Richmond, California, and a former prison guard at Chino. Now, there's one black man on the adult authority now. However, he was a former civil servant in the prison system. There's one Chicano. However, he was also in the prison system before he was appointed. Now, I mean, what does this mean? This means that they're ex-police, ex-agents, ex-prosecutors, all of whom have come from a background which is directly opposed to the prisoner. And of course they're going to take the side of the system. They're going to take the side that's directly opposed to the interests of the prisoners. And these people have the right to set a date, a parole date for
prisoners.
Certainly, and of course now with the increased surge of political activity and with the increasingly aggressive posture that prisoners are assuming in prison, the indeterminate sentence is used as a form of retaliation. It's used as a form of repression because prisoners are either told or else they realize that if they continue to engage in any kind of political activity, they aren't going to get a date.
How do you get 2 burning questions in at one time? You know, when they're coming in my head right now and I want to get them in at the same time. I'll try one first. It had been suggested by the executive director of the Correctional Institutions of California that lobotomies, that brain surgery, be used on those inmates who have violent tendencies. Also, we know that at 2 institutions like Tascadera and also Vacaville, certain drugs have been used on prisoners. This trend, we note, has taken place, and yet there was also a very strong suggestion by the executive director that lobotomies be engaged in.
What does that sound like? I mean, what does that remind you of? It evokes in my mind all of the horrors of Nazi Germany, all of the experiments that were done in the concentration camps. People who accuse us when we say that there are very definite fascist tendencies in America today ought to think for a moment when the director of the Department of Corrections can get up and suggest that human beings have brain surgery to prevent them from feeling, to prevent them from reacting, because what does a lobotomy do?
Yeah, I understand that it damages the front section of the brain.
It destroys it through,
yes.
By means of attaching electrodes to the brain. It destroys very vital sections of the brain. I think, of course, I'm not a doctor, but from what I've learned, once you receive this lobotomy, you become practically a vegetable. Of course, they maintain that it prevents the patient from being aggressive and violent. But what they're really talking about is stifling the political militancy that exists on the inside of the prison.
Yeah, I understand that lobotomies have been used, and this is undoubtedly well-founded, to suppress pain.
You know, I really believe they would have actually initiated this policy of brain surgery had not there been the kind of reaction that there was. Probably the way the news leaked out was an attempt to test what public reaction was going to be like. And had it not been what it was, more than likely a whole series of those kinds of experiments would have been initiated. But there's something that has not received very widespread publicity, and that is the use of these drugs in Vacaville and Atascadero that you were talking about before. Apparently the drug that is most widely used is called anectine, and it is used in what they call aversion treatment, I think.
Yes, that's right.
Isn't that the term that they
aversion
use?
Treatment, right.
To avert the prisoner from any kind of assertive activity. From what I've read, the experience of taking that drug is so frightening and so horrible. Apparently, when they administer it, it causes for a period of about 60 seconds the sensation of dying. It completely it completely arrests the
sort of like suffocation.
You feel like you're suffocating, you feel like you're drowning, you feel like you're dying. Then, apparently, there's a psychiatrist who sits next to you and discusses what you've done. It's used as a disciplinary measure, and that the next time you get ready to strike out at a guard or do whatever you're charged with doing, you think about what it feels like, because you're going to be injected with some more of this anectine. That's what they really tell them. And I can imagine that once a person goes through that kind of experience of the actual sensation of dying, it is going to begin to affect the mind. And you see, I think that we have to look at what's going on in the prisons today in that respect as being a signal of what might possibly come in the society as a whole. No, I think that it is probably a truism by now that in any given society, what goes on in the prisons reflects very important elements of the society as a whole, and that you can learn something about the nature of the society by looking at what happens behind its walls, among its captives.
Yeah. Perhaps one of the critical questions for the use of anectine as well as lobotomies has to do with who gives the proper consent for a person. Does the person himself or herself, who's the prisoner, or the inmate,
Well,
give proper consent, a volunteer for that.
Well, that's what they say. They say that this drug is used on an entirely voluntary basis. But what does that mean to a woman or to a man who's in prison? They know, and the prison officials know, that if they fail to submit to this kind of drug treatment, this is just going to be one more strike held against them. And we get back to the indeterminate sentence.
Yeah.
Because many of them are on indeterminate sentences, and every time there's a strike against them on their record, this is given to the adult authority, and therefore their sentence is prolonged.
It seems to me there's another thing also, Angela, and it has to do with the selection of persons. You know, if, in fact, it's done for psychiatric reasons, who selects the persons who have the destruct?
You know what's happening now. Reagan, of course, just recently talked about abolishing San Quentin, right? What they're doing at this moment is that the so-called violent inmates, and almost inevitably, when they talk about violent inmates, they're talking about political activists in prisons. They are being transferred from San Quentin, from Soledad, from Folsom, which are the three major maximum security prisons in California. They're being transferred to Vacaville now. And I don't think it's coincidental that
they're going
these
to
kinds of things are happening in Vacaville. They're sending them down there now, supposedly for psychiatric observation. They're going to be there for 6 months. Then they send them back, and they send another group in.
Maybe this is the selective process, then, that they're talking about
I
as
don't
it
think
relates
it's
to
coincidental that these two things are happening at the same time. And there are probably there's probably a lot of other things which are going on now, too, that we just don't know about, simply because it's so difficult for prisoners to get news out to the people.
Angela, there's something that's taking place in the prisons. There's an awareness that's taking place. But we've heard the term political prisoner emerge in the last few years very strongly. What is a political prisoner? Are there different levels of political prisoners?
Well, of course, throughout the history of the world, there have been political prisoners. We could even talk about Socrates, who was also a political prisoner. But getting into the contemporary situation, I think that many people have failed to see that the political prisoner is not only Bobby Seale or Erica Huggins or Huey Newton or the Soledad brothers. There are scores of thousands of unnamed political prisoners who are now being held captive in this country. I would say that I can lay out perhaps about 4 different categories of political prisoners. The first one is, of course, the political prisoner, the sister or the brother, who's in prison purely because of his or her ideas and political activities in the struggle for liberation. The crime with which that person is charged is almost inevitably a pretext for assaulting that person for his political beliefs. That would be the first kind of political prisoner. Then, of course, there's a political prisoner who, in a sense, has done what he or she is charged with by the authorities. And I can think of examples throughout the history of this country. Yet, I should point out that although he or she has probably done the thing for which the charge has been lodged against them, it's not the same, it's not a crime in the sense that the system defines it as a crime. Nat Turner, for instance, was such a political prisoner. He was charged and he was hanged for murder. But of course, from our perspective as black people, he was a valiant fighter for the liberation of slaves. And therefore, when he fought back, and when he led a slave uprising, we would not call that murder. It is murder only from the point of view of the a system which is trying to continue to oppress and enslave the people who are fighting back. Then, of course, there are all of the I could give you a number of examples of that type of political prisoner, but I'll go on to the next level. And that, for this, we have to go inside the walls of the dungeons, and we see thousands and thousands of sisters and brothers who have actually been, well, they have been arrested and convicted of offenses which don't necessarily have political contours, but once they get into prison and once they become aware of all of the currents and passions of black liberation and the struggle for freedom for all people, they become aware of what it is that led them to commit those offenses in the first place. They therefore transform themselves into political beings and become active behind the walls and are therefore subject to retaliation by the prison authorities. And we could talk about Ruchell Magee, we could talk about George Jackson, Fleta Drumgo, John Clouchet, and there's one brother whom we haven't heard that much about, and I think it's very important to talk about him at this point. His name is Robert Wesley Wells.
He's been in for quite some time, hasn't he?
He's 62 years old now. He's been in for over 40 years. Mm-hmm. He was convicted of stealing a car and has been in for over 40 years. Apparently, Robert Wesley Wells was and continues to be the type of black man who will not allow himself to be dehumanized, who will not kowtow to prison officials, and who asserts his rights as a black man. Apparently, the Attorney General of California wrote a letter to the adult authority saying that they did not want a sentence set, a determinate sentence set for Robert Wells. They wanted the adult authority to leave it open because they knew that at some point, he had an indeterminate sentence, by the way, we were talking about that before. They knew, they said, that at some point, Wesley Wells was going to become involved with a guard and might possibly assault a guard. Then they could use this other horrible law that they have on the books in the state of California, which makes the death penalty mandatory for a prisoner who assaults a non-inmate. This letter is on file. I was informed of the existence of this letter by Wesley Wells' attorney. Sure enough, he was provoked into a confrontation with a guard at that time through a cuspidor, which hit the wall and ricocheted and hit the guard's head. It drew a little blood. However, the guard was back to work in about a week or so. Robert Wesley Wells was then charged with 4,500 and received the death penalty. Charles Gary was his attorney. Leo Branton, who's my attorney now, was also working on the case. With the help of a mass movement on the outside during the 40s, this was towards the end of the 40s, the death sentence was commuted, but it was commuted to life without possibility of parole. Mm-hmm. And to this date, the only way that Wesley Wells can ever get out of jail, the only way that he's going to avoid dying behind the walls of San Quentin or Soledad or some other prison in the state is if Ronald Reagan would grant him executive clemency. Of course, we know what Ronald Reagan is like, and we know that he's not about to make that kind of a gesture. Yet, I think that it's going to be extremely important for all of us to try to mount a campaign and force Reagan to let Wesley Wells out of prison.
Ruchell Magee went through some trying times. He's been in now some 16 or 17 years, hasn't he? In his sentencing in Los Angeles, he, I think, has been in San Quentin now some 8 years. A very brilliant man, I must say. In many regards, he's certainly spoken out Ruchell Magee will be, I guess, one who will find himself in similar circumstance, who has found himself in similar
Ruchell, I
circumstances.
think, is a very, very beautiful man and is a kind of a symbol of what black people have been forced to experience in America. He was charged with a case of rape, and we know about all of the...
That was in Louisiana, I think, as I recall.
We know about all of our brothers who've gone to their death or who have spent large portions of their life in prison because they happened to look in the direction of a white woman. Ruchell is another very shining example, like George and like Wesley Wells, and like I could go on to infinity, of sisters and brothers in prison who achieve the most remarkable heights of consciousness and commit themselves to struggling for the liberation of their people. And because they do this, they are the ones on whom the repressive might of the prison system comes down so strongly.
Angela, I ask you to bring some letters that you had received. I know you've just received thousands, but I did ask you to bring several letters. Could you read several of those letters for me at this time? Some are just very fascinating, but...
Well, maybe I should just say as a preface that being in jail, and I've been in for about 15 months now, the thousands and thousands of letters that come from people all over the world expressing their solidarity with me and all other political prisoners has been a remarkable source of strength, and both not only for me, but also for the sisters with whom I come in contact, because I always let them know what's happening on the outside, how the struggle for our freedom is advancing. This letter, it's a really beautiful letter written by a very, very young child, apparently. And it says very simply, "Dear Angela Davis, my name is Sarah. I wish that you were free. This is a picture of you when you will be free. Love, Sarah." And on the other side, there's a picture that she's drawn.
Yeah. Is this Sarah, you, when you will be free?
Well, she says it's a picture of me. You see the smile on my face. I guess that's supposed to be symbolic of freedom.
Yeah.
I get a lot of letters from very young children. This is something which is so very beautiful. A lot of people somehow have the feeling that the movement is collapsing. But I think that what is happening is that the ideas that a few people have been expressing for a long time are penetrating to the masses of people. And you have sisters and brothers who are, say, 5, 6 years old, who know of what has to be done. There's another letter that I brought along from a 10-year-old black brother, and it's a really moving letter. He says, "Dear Miss Davis, my mother gave me $5 for Christmas and told me to give it away to someone else that I felt needed it. I'm sending it to you because I read about what happened to you. I do not think you are guilty, and I hope that you can get out of prison. I'm only 10 years old, and I'm black, but from what I've heard and read, I think some people are trying to ruin your life. All those accidents, like the killing of George Jackson, were on purpose. Try to hang on. We'll have our fingers crossed." Yours truly, and he gives its name. It's a really beautiful, moving letter. And that's only one out of many that I've received from children that age. It makes very concrete something that Jose Marti, the apostle of the Cuban Revolution, said. He said, "Los niños son la esperanza del mundo," children are the hope of the world. And I think this is true, that we do have a revolution moving along, and it can be seen in our children, in our youth.
This really has quite an impact with you then, doesn't it? Really means a lot to you.
Well, what it does is it completely eradicates this feeling of isolation and this feeling of separation that the prisons and jails are designed to create. And that's why it's so necessary for people on the outside to seek and find ways of expressing their solidarity with sisters and brothers in prison. If it's a letter, I receive thousands of letters from sisters and brothers in prison, and I've been trying to answer, if only with a few lines, all of the letters that I get from this side of the walls. Of course, that's just a very small gesture. People on the outside have far more flexibility than we on the inside have, and should begin to develop aggressive and creative means of showing their solidarity and support and concern for all of the sisters and brothers who are in here.
Mm-hmm. You've got another letter there. I see it on the desk, and I want to hear from that one also, because I think you told me it was from a brother who was in prison.
This is one of the many, many letters that I've received from sisters and brothers in prison. This is from the Ohio Penitentiary, Ohio State Reformatory. And it says a friendship letter where the relationship is, they have to fill out forms. The letters are generally censored. The letter says, I don't know if you will receive this letter, or even if you will be able to answer it, but my admiration for you compels me to write this letter. As you can see, I am also in confinement, for which I have been confined for the past 21 months. Then he goes on to say, sorry to say my crime was selfish and stupid, unarmed robbery. Since being confined, I've been allowed to go on speaking engagements. During my speeches, I have endorsed your actions, but most of these places I've spoken were churches, and they all ask one main question, which is, why is Angela Davis communist? This is a very hard question to answer, mainly because I don't feel I've been taught the true meaning of communism. This is one of my reasons for writing you at the time.
Hold it right there. Why is Angela Davis a communist?
Actually, I think I answered that before when we were talking about what a revolutionary is.
Mm-hmm. Many times the term communist, because I think it's been used by so many different aspects of our society to put down rather than to let people try to understand. Everybody shuns away from it. It's like it's a disease or something like that. And I just, what I'm trying to get through is that the brother here in that letter is raising a question, and therefore in his question, it seems that he's trying to say that there are some people who are plagued by that, and they let that get in the way. They don't want to know Angela Davis as a person. Or even if they do, that prevents them from coming to know Angela Davis as a person.
Well, you see, now, that might be true for, say, the vast majority of white people.
Yeah.
But one of the things which really impressed me when I was on the streets and fighting for my job at UCLA was that whenever I spoke to black people, whenever I spoke in the black community, very few people had hang-ups about communism. I can remember many times walking down the street and having someone stop me and say, are you Angela Davis? And I would say yes, and they would express their solidarity and say, a lot of sisters and brothers would say, even though I don't really know what communism is all about, just as the brother here said, they say, we know that there must be something good about it, because otherwise the man wouldn't be coming down on you so hard. Mm-hmm. So I think that the resistance to understanding what communism is all about doesn't exist nearly as much in the black community as it does in the country as a whole. This letter here is an indication of that. What he's saying is that although he realizes that this country has kept away from him and many of our sisters and brothers the knowledge of what communism is, he wants to know about it. Yeah. And I'm sure that that's, when he says that that's one of the main questions that's asked, I doubt whether there's in the black community at least, whether there's whether there are huge contours of hostility.
Yeah,
it's just a desire, curiosity to know.
I think
and
that's
there's something, what I generally say, and I answered the brother and tried to explain in a few words why I was a communist, and I said essentially the same thing that I had said when I told you why I was a revolutionary, because I have a very strong love for oppressed people, for my people. I want to see them free, and I want to see all oppressed people throughout the world free. And I realize that the only way that we can do this is by moving towards a revolutionary society where the needs and the interests and the wishes of all people can be respected.
Angela, there are a number of women in prisons, aren't they?
About 14,000, I think.
Yeah. And a lot of people certainly would not even be aware of that.
Well, that's because, of course, of all the forces of male supremacy to which women have been subjected for so long in the society. Not that much attention has been directed towards women in prison, and there are a lot of women in prison. There are sisters who are in jail because of their political beliefs. There are sisters who have gone... In fact, in my experiences in New York and in Marin County and here, I go to exercise a couple of times a week at the women's prison in Santa Clara County, so I do have some contact with sisters there. One of the things that the sisters told me when I got over there was that they really wanted to spend their time while they were in jail studying so that they could make significant contributions to the liberation struggle, except that there was no available material. So one of the things that I asked some of the people from the National United Committee to do was to make an appeal to people on the outside to donate books to the sisters in Milpitas.
Yeah, I know you asked my church to make contributions, and certainly they have been sending books to the sisters at Milpitas.
Let me just give you one, I think, very striking example of the lack of attention to women's prisons. We know about the Tombs, we know about Attica, we know about San Quentin. But how much do we know about the demonstrations and the strikes that took place in the Women's House of Detention? How much do we know about the revolt that occurred at Alderson Federal Penitentiary in Virginia? How much do we know about that? Yeah. How much do we know about all the unnamed sisters who are in prison today?
And it has been your contention all along that Angela Davis is not to be looked upon as a hero, but Angela Davis, along with the sisters and brothers in all prisons, must be seen in light of the struggle that's going on as it relates to the liberation of all people.
Well, I don't see myself as any different, any more important than all of my captive sisters and brothers. And in fact, what I have attempted to do within all of these restrictions that surround me has been to draw people who have expressed support and concern for me into the struggle for all political prisoners. I've said on a number of occasions that one of the first experiences I had in this jail here, after being transferred from Marin County, was very revealing of what the mass struggle can do for sisters and brothers in prison. When they drove me down in the wee hours of the morning and brought me into the cell here, they took all of my clothes and made me take my underwear off, and I was sitting up in the cell, huddled in some blankets, freezing. And suddenly, a mass of letters came flowing into the jail here, protesting the conditions. And I don't know whether it was coincidental or not, but suddenly the conditions did begin to relax. One of the things that struck me then, and of course I'm constantly aware of this, is that because of the movement that has galvanized around me, there is a lot of public attention on me and my case, and there are certain kinds of things that I can directly appeal to people for. But what about all of the sisters and brothers that we've been talking about during this interview? What about all of the other thousands and thousands who are in America's prisons today? People should begin to realize that they have a responsibility to see to it that America does not head in the direction of fascism, and it begins right at the level of the prisons. That's why the prison struggle is so important, because I see it as being a signal as to what the entire society will be about in the future. And that's why I think it's in the interest of all of the people, many of whom may not know anyone personally in prison, but most black people, of course, have had some contact with the prisons. People should really begin to express themselves aggressively and boldly and demand that something be done about the prisons in this society today.
Angela, we're going to stop at this point. We've reached a time where we must. Thank you very much for this interview. Thank you for rapping with me. And I want to say goodbye to you.